Don't blink. No one notices the man who never blinks at the corner of 8th and Delirium, except the ones whose hearts race when nothing is chasing them. It doesn't hunt, it lingers behind dumpsters and benches in the train station, just out of view, but you feel it. It lingers in the periphery of anyone who felt it watching at just the right, wrong moment. When it's hungry, radar's up. That was its gift, to be mistaken for a shadow, a flicker, a trick of adrenaline, until you locked eyes with a reflection that didn't blink when you did. And each time it came back into focus, its lips seemed to have lifted just enough to make a difference, to be uncanny. Not one, but two noticed him, one perfectly fine Thursday, with nothing altogether special about it, outside of the fact that was the first time it had happened. And the idea of consuming two for the price of one was too tantalizing for the essence to release. Its smile grew teeth as it split into two and followed each in either direction, sinking in as goosebumps formed over their skin. Connection. The hunt was on. Vivian was already late. She didn't have time to dawdle, but Renee was relentless. She groaned and answered the fourth call on its final ring.
Renee, I told you I'm busy today. I can't just sit around and gossip. I'm sorry.
She didn't have the patience. Sometimes it felt like she made issues just so she had something to talk about. And when all else failed, she reached out to everyone within her contact list until someone offered her juicy details they just had to get off their own chests. Vivian had watched her in real time, then reach out to any one of their mutuals just to tell them all about it. They always took the bait. That was the part, oddly, that bothered Vivian the most. She reached over and grabbed her water bottle, stuffing it into her gym bag.
It's my day off, and I really want to get some stuff in. Some stuff? That's vague. Okay, well, I'll make it quick. I know you live in Eastwood Estates.
Vivian rolled her eyes and grabbed her yoga mat. She scanned the house from the entryway. The lights were off, everything unplugged that she might have left running. She nodded into the assessment. Renee continued, taking her silence as invitation.
That's near North Mall Drive, right? Yes, Renee, that's correct. You've been here before.
She tried to hurry her along.
Well, I just thought you should know to be careful if you get out walking around in that area. 3 women have disappeared in the last month, right around that bus stop about halfway along that Weavy Road. You know the one I told you made me feel sick.
She trailed off for a moment, and Vivian could picture her squinting into a map on her screen. She chuckled, shaking her head.
Thanks, Nene. I'm not too worried about it. I'll keep a lookout, though, if I get out that way.
She closed the door softly.
What do you mean? That's like your running route every other day.
Vivian slowed her steps and frowned. That was insightful of her friend. She suddenly felt less aggressive toward the gossip she usually came along with.
That was thoughtful of you to mention, or remember, even. Huh. Sorry, I guess I wasn't really paying attention. I almost brushed that off.
Renee chuckled from the other end.
Well, I actually like you, so I pay attention for other reasons than most things.
She stated honestly. Vivian laughed and jogged toward the sidewalk from the entrance of her apartment building. The park across the street hosted all kinds of morning classes. Today was Pilates in the park, then yoga was directly afterward.
Well, I actually like you more all of a sudden. Thanks for that.
She let out a sigh as she made it to the opposite side of the street.
Girl, I've really gotta go. We can catch up sometime later this week. I've gotta keep myself focused on what's right in front of me right now. It's been really busy lately. I figured, since we haven't seen you in like forever. Thanks, I know. Okay, fine. At least let me know when you get home tonight, so I don't have to call in a search party or something. We ladies have to watch each other's back, you know.
They said their goodbyes, and Vivian let out another deep sigh. She tossed her phone into her yoga bag and made her way to the clearing on the close side of the small man-made lake. She liked having a vantage point at the jogging path. She'd sometimes come and sit here just for inspiration on slow days. The park was lively. Bodies bustled along the circuit of the sidewalk. A few rollerbladers, a group of women walking fast, in tandem, all in somewhat matching spandex. Vivian smiled at the different groups, clicks, and pairings. She felt a familiar tug at her heart. Keep going, someday. She could almost hear the trees whispering, always someday. She frowned and closed her eyes, taking in the hum of it all. She took out an earbud, then the other, and placed them into her bag with the rest of her electronic bonds. She readjusted her rolled mat and found a spot to sit, a little ways away from a few other women, with their mats already spread in the grass. She smiled sweetly at the one who looked her way. The woman twiddled her fingers and offered an enthusiastic, silent, "Hey," before turning her attention back to the conversation they were already in. Vivian felt a ping of unease. She didn't like it. It had followed her since her run earlier that morning. Inexplicably, the reflection of a shadow passed through her mind, along with a hazy memory of a man in a stuffy jacket. She felt awkward that she'd just taken out her headphones, and that maybe she should put them back in so they didn't think she was listening in on their conversation. The sense of unease grew out of nowhere, attaching to literally anything that came to mind.
Shouldn't be here. You don't belong. What if you stretch weird? What if you can't do the poses?
Vivian frowned at the thoughts cascading in around her. A figure in her peripheral vision caused her to glance in its direction. The figure seemed to be staying just out of her eyes' reach, somehow always in the corner of her gaze, no matter where she shifted her eyes. She shifted her focus back to the woman, and again the shadow settled in, just outside of focus.
You should leave before they realize how out of place you are, and you become what they talk about as a group. Everyone does it.
The reflection of the friend she just hung up with came to mind, as if to confirm the statement. But I don't.
You do it with yourself. You talk about everybody behind their backs.
No, I don't. Vivian bit her lip. Another of the four women looked her way. The smile she offered felt sinister. Vivian took a deep breath, suddenly feeling as if she was on trial within her own expression. She closed her eyes and blew out the breath, as if the action carried the sudden wave of anxiousness with it. She repeated with another, waging war on the feeling, the way her therapist had directed. She let her hands stretch toward the sky, as high as they could reach, and took in another deep breath. Just as she was settling in, a burst of laughter shot from the group. She glanced over. This time they were all looking at her, and looked away just as quickly. She blinked back, surprised, looking down at her outfit to be sure she hadn't stepped in or spilt anything on herself. You're fine. They aren't even talking about you. Don't be so big-headed. She reassured herself, taking another breath. They had more interesting things to talk about. She pictured herself watching people in the surroundings while listening to someone else speak. It wasn't anything sinister or malicious. It was natural to be drawn to ping with anything else alive. She was doing something unique and on her own right now, alone in a park, all by herself. She smiled at the reflection, feeling the sunshine on her skin as she let her eyes stray over the park. As quickly as the shadow had slunk into her peripherals, the idea of it had disappeared, as if it had never been. It slunk to the background, waiting for the perfect opportunity to resurface. "You don't have to sit so far away, you know," a voice called Vivian back to her present moment. There were 6 of them in their cluster now. 2 more had joined, leaving very little space between the mats. Vivian smiled at the face full of genuine kindness, looking back at her expectantly. "Thank you for the invitation, but I'm already kind of settled in." The woman who'd called over smiled and nodded knowingly. Vivian appreciated the olive branch.
I can be such a jerk sometimes. Already settled in? Am I kidding myself?
She rolled her eyes and stood up, dragging her setup closer to the cluster. She propped up next to the one who'd called her over. "My name's Ronnie." Her smile widened. "Ronnie, how cool. My name's Vivian." And just like that, she made new friends at the playground. She barely noticed the sense of dread stalking the dark side of her mind. Halfway across town, Sebastian stepped into the courtyard of his apartment complex. They were always working on something. He groaned. The construction workers looked him over with a cold nod as they passed. The one on the end hadn't so much as acknowledged him as he scraped shoulders in passing. The anxiousness he'd felt since 8th Street had him in a hurry to get home. He pushed through the rotating door and made a beeline for the stairs. He didn't want to take any chances of getting stuck in an elevator on his way through the final stretch to home base. Normally, he didn't think of such mundane bad luck. But today, it seemed he couldn't get away from it. Everything appeared to be a potential threat. He heaved his way up the steps, taking the last spiral in the staircase 2 at a time. He pushed through the heavy door after flashing his keycard over the pad at its opening. His phone vibrated from his pocket. His slacks lit up. Once, twice, 3 times. He ignored it, and it continued until he reached his door. He tapped in the security code. The LED flashed green. The lock clicked. Sebastian shouldered his way through and took off his sports jacket. He tossed it on the coat tree carelessly and loosened his tie.
What a fucking day,
he thought, walking to his fridge for a cold beer.
What a stupid fucking day. It can just be over now.
He looked at his watch and popped the cap all at once. The gratifying hiss calmed his nerves. He took a deep drink of the refreshment, letting the carbonation light up his mouth. The room shuddered. The lights were flickering just slightly. Sebastian blinked back, surprise.
It's gotta be the construction,
he told himself shakily. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a tall silhouette looming in the doorway. The swig he'd just taken caught in his throat. He choked and coughed his airway free and gasped for air. His eyes drawn to the doorway, fists raised, ready to face any intruder. He let out a breath and sucked in another. A nervous laugh radiated from his guts. It was just the stupid jacket. He rolled his eyes and took another swallow.
I need to calm the fuck down.
He walked to the window and looked outside. The courtyard was busy. A woman sat in the bench next to the fountain, reading, and another was pulling invisible weeds from the community rose beds. He pulled out his phone. "Jordan," he groaned. His sister would want to talk for hours. The thought was suddenly comforting. Maybe that's what he needed, to get out of his head and hear about the adventures of parenthood. He hit the redial and placed the device on speakerphone. The lights flickered, dimming just visibly enough that he could tell the difference between the normal lighting and its current state. He let it go.
Hey, how's it going?
She answered, but her voice was strained.
Hey, is now a bad time? I just saw you called. I had my hands full. Was trying to get back home. It's been a day. Yeah, now's fine. Mackenzie's sticking something in her mouth, and I think it's... Oh, shit.
She murmured, yelling away from the phone.
Mac, get that rock out of your mouth, right now. Now, Mackie.
Sebastian's heart softened. He chuckled and took another drink. He could hear Ella in the background, mimicking her mother's chastisement. He laughed when Mackenzie protested that everyone was ganging up on her. The dramas of childhood.
Some things never change. That sounds just like we used to.
He crossed his arms over his chest, watching a jogger move through his field of view. A flash of the scene from the morning played out. The jogger he'd nearly run over while trying to figure out what he was seeing.
Yeah, Maggie's a little turd, just like you were. Always doing things that make me scratch my head and wonder what the fuck made that a good idea.
She was grumbling into the phone, clearly making a move, while trying not to voice her opinions aloud.
Just a sec, Seabass.
She paused, then addressed Mackenzie.
Sweetie, we weren't against you. I'm against you breaking your teeth or choking on a rock, okay? When you're all grown up and out of my care, you can do whatever you want. For now, I need you to keep the rocks under your feet. No, don't throw those at your sister. That's...
Sebastian could picture the whole scene. Suddenly, he was far away from the anxiousness that had followed him home. He turned from the window and made his way back to the kitchen, resolute to make a good, clean meal and get a full night of sleep. Everything would be better in the morning. He walked past the dark TV screen, eyes on the fridge and his directive. His mind was so consumed with whether to go with fish or chicken that he didn't see the figure of a withered man. His eyes were hollow in the screen. Half of his face was expressionless, like it had been wiped away. The half-exposed face offered a sinister grin, like a predator, sure of its prey. The figure flickered as Sebastian laughed at his sister's simple explanations that worked perfectly for a child. A negotiator. She never used to be. He wondered if that was a trait that turned on somehow with parenthood. When the face returned to the reflection on the television, it looked perturbed, angry even, its lips sneering as Sebastian's mood continued to lighten. Another burst of laughter sent it into the air. It disappeared as he turned on the television. Vivian splashed cold, refreshing water over her face. She let it rest in her cupped hands. She rubbed them over the surface, focusing in on her temples, and let out a groan as she wiped the expressions of the day away. What a weird day it had been. The flash of a stranger's face at the intersection came to mind. That's when it had all started. She'd gone for a run right after waking up. She remembered seeing the street signs.
What the hell?
She pictured a hooded figure next to the stop sign. She hadn't thought much of it, but the man walking past the intersection, in a stiff-looking jacket and sunglasses it was way too early to be wearing. He was so taken aback he'd almost run into her while he was staring at the figure. He seemed startled by the presence of another human and sized her up, almost as if gauging whether she was real or not. Vivian loaded her toothbrush and scrubbed thoughtfully, eyes on the sink through the mirror reflection.
Why had she forgotten about that interaction?
And why had it left her with such an anxious feeling? And why, suddenly, did she remember it like it was a bad dream?
Had it been a dream?
She frowned into the silver surface. A ripple in the loft curtains caught her eye through the mirror. For a moment, she thought she could see a hooded figure in the reflection. She gasped and spun around, her hands clasping the sink behind her for balance. The soft material billowed in a cool breeze. The frame was empty. She let out a deep, rasping breath as her heartbeat left her throat and reoccupied its original space. She placed a hand over her chest and took a few more deep breaths. It wasn't there. You've been stressed out. You need to chill. You've got to calm down. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, the image of the old man with hollowed eyes and an empty smile full of rickety teeth was staring out at her from behind her own eyelids. He seemed to be mouthing something she couldn't quite catch. She gasped and flung her eyes wide open, now terrified to try to fall asleep. What if she dreamt about it? For some reason, it felt like that would make it more real than it already was. Nix's soft coat pushed against Vivian's ankles. She was looking up at her furless friend with eyes that shone brightly in the dim light of the unlit hallway. Always trying to trip me, you little menace. So you know I can't feed you if I'm dead, so joke's on you, little night goblin. She joked, but deep down she felt a surge of gratitude for the company. She chuckled at the images flashing through her mind. Nix had been her little shadow for 3 years now. She reached down and ruffled the fur between her ears the way she loved. An eruption of purrs echoed through the space. Everything felt less heavy with that sound in the air, like everything was going to be okay. She threw herself onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. She didn't bother getting under the covers. It was too hot for that. Her apartment didn't have air conditioning at the moment, and apparently all the heat from the ones underneath somehow ventilated into the top floor, she had to imagine. It had to be. She frowned, and it instantly softened with the weight of her furry friend as she placed herself over Vivian's back. The pressure felt nice. So did the soft rumble. In no time, Vivian drifted into sleep. A calm before the storm, as if to relay the shift in direction, her nose twitched. She rubbed it into the face of her favorite pillow. Nix remained vigilant, eyes on the open window, watching. She remained still, the only sign of agitation her twitching tail. A low growl radiated between her soft purring as she watched the shifting shadows take shape and then dematerialize. Vivian tossed and turned all night. She woke up feeling more tired than she'd felt before falling asleep. Her body was achy, as if she'd spent the night wrestling the bad dreams that followed her into her kitchen. As she made coffee, she puzzled over the final whisper that had left her dreams with her as she jolted awake for the final time.
3 days to find me, or I make a meal of you.
The old man had followed her into her dreams. Only there, he'd only had half of his face, one hollow eye, the other side, as if he hadn't been fully drawn into a character. She'd seen the man in the stiff jacket again, in her dream, with the same stiff, surprised expression he'd worn earlier, and sunglasses over his eyes. When she'd pulled them away from his face in the dream, he'd had the same hollow, empty eyes as the old man. Sockets full of shadows and nothing more. She shivered into the warm morning air. A clammy sweat overtook her hands as she prepared the coffee pot. He was mouthing something she couldn't quite catch, mimicking the mouth movements from the shadow in her mirror the night before.
Just stop.
The command came straight from her gut.
It was just a
she told herself as she took a deep breath.
I'm letting the stress of other situations build up and get to me. That's all. Be logical. Stay with the routine.
She released a heavy exhale, imagining dark smoke rising up and away from her as she released it. She did it again, letting the mental image sink in deeper. She shook out her hands and listened to the coffee percolating.
Just get through this week. 3 days.
She chuckled.
3 days. Oh my gosh.
Realizing the significance of what the dream figure had said. Her project review was in that same time frame. The anxiousness flittered and lifted away from her shoulders as she realized the connection. There was nothing supernatural, nothing strange, just a fever dream, overperformance anxiety, that's all. She watched Nyx leap to the counter and rush to the edge closest to her. Not on the kitchen counter's Cuddle Muffin. She lifted the cat into her arms. Nyx continued watching the point, in space over Vivian's shoulder. Her claws dug in, holding fast. She let loose a small, guttural growl that sent goosebumps over Vivian's skin. Ew, stop that, you're freaking me out. And that hurts, you little shit. Nyx's growl grew louder. Her tail turned into a bottle brush, and she launched herself from Vivian's shoulder. She screeched, "Oh my gosh, what's gotten into you?" She filled her to-go mug with hot coffee and regathered her work life into her backpack. She made her way to the door, deciding on a comfortable pair of flats instead of the kitten heels she'd picked the night before. Her hair was in a messy bun, no bobby pins or frills today. She let out a deep sigh as she locked the door. It felt good, like a steam engine blowing off excess. She giggled over the mental image as she let the lighter side of life lead her to the next step of the day. She didn't even notice the lights flickering as she passed them. She was determined to have a smooth week. Just finish strong. Sebastian was beside himself. He couldn't kick the feeling he was being watched. His subconscious seemed to be playing tricks, leaning into the paranoia.
Prick.
His hand shook as he reached for the honey. He clenched his fists and shook them out again, jumping up and down in place the way he used to when preparing for a race or a speech or a meeting. It felt good. He divvied the sweetener in and poured the hot coffee over top.
The bees are dying.
A blip from a headline he'd skimmed over recently came to mind.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
The thought finished. What was wrong with his brain the last day? It had been a living nightmare, only to wake up from one that morning. And sleep used to be his one refuge from everything. He never remembered dreams, just woke up, rested, ready to tackle whatever the day brought in.
How did that change? What happened?
The answer came in straight, leaving a lingering image of a silhouette and the brunette he'd watched see the same thing he had, while everyone else had passed as if there was nothing strange. What he had seen, he couldn't ignore. It was as if an alien, with no idea what humans looked like, had been shown a composite and then just popped in pretending to be what it had seen. It hadn't even been the appearance that had unsettled him, but the almost audible demand. He'd followed the directive without thinking, straight into what had become a horrible nightmare. Sebastian twisted his coffee lid tightly, just so no chance for it to come off and spill all over him in transit was available. The twinge of paranoia over worst-case scenarios was front and center. He usually never thought of those things. Usually, his mind was pinned to best cases. So what had changed? And why was he having nightmares about some random woman he passed in the street, pounding against her mirror, screaming out at him in terror he couldn't hear, but could sense through the glass? The sing-song taunt poured through him like a bad sales jingle that he couldn't get out of his head. It repeated. Sebastian checked his lock twice before leaving. He even doubled back to be sure he hadn't left it unhinged. He started counting his steps while moving down the staircase, an old self-soothing technique, while still not trusting the elevator to house him without somehow ending up stuck, and him then ending up late. Another worst nightmare. Being the guy other people have to wait on. He clenched his fists, suddenly becoming aware of the lights in the corridor above him sputtering and flinching. Through the flicker, a silhouette darker than shadow peeked over the edge of the floor he'd come from. Sebastian dropped his briefcase. A sudden wave of terror and helplessness passed through him as the only half of its face exposed drew up into a shadowed half-moon grin. The light was darker than night, but he felt its eyes and hunger on him, along with the restraint of a predator enjoying the dynamic of the hunt, and in no hurry to accomplish the inevitable end result. The light shuddered and dimmed. Sebastian backed toward the door. In the next blink, the shadow was gone, and he burst into daylight, leaving the concrete corridor behind him. He had to figure out what was happening. Was the latent stress finally getting to him, like Bridget and his therapist had suggested it might? He took a deep breath and set his eyes on the directive.
Just get through the day. Just get through the day.
To be continued, maybe. You've just heard the opening of Don't Blink. If a line lingered, if a shadow followed you here, you might already be part of the story. Let me know what came up, and maybe together we'll find the ending. If you'd like to hear more of this story, please share, and all feedback is greatly appreciated.